put it. You're known as the bad take machine on fucking Twitter. You know that?
Yeah, that's true, but I guess only according to Twitter, so take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah. I'm gonna turn this music off here.
Yeah, I gotcha.
You look fucking 10. I feel like Chris Hansen's gonna pop out. Sorry.
Yeah. I'm 18, so not
well, there
too
you
far
go.
off.
So you've made a little bit of a name for yourself going around Twitter having hot takes, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've
Yeah.
You've been on a Vosh's stream before, right?
Yeah, a couple times, yeah.
And recently you invented veganism. You're the first person to think of veganism, and now you're trying to proselytize it to the world, right?
Yeah, I figured it out. There's some people who were kind of almost there, but I'm really the one who did the theory when it comes to vegan ethics. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So you want to like pimp your shit on here for a sec? Like talk about like what you got, what you want people's eyeballs directed towards and shit?
Oh yeah. So I have a YouTube channel. It's called Mouthy Infidel. I have a Twitter channel or a Twitter account that's also called Mouthy Infidel. More or less, I just try my best to argue for opinions that I have. So like political shit and philosophy shit. I'm pretty far to the left. I'm a socialist, progressive, globalist, all that shit. So yeah, that's basically what I do.
Someone in the chat just said, "Oh God, another Vosh sycophant." I wouldn't really say that. I would say he's more of a Destiny sycophant, if you really want to be honest.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
That's the take.
I have my disagreements with Destiny as well.
That's what the take is on Twitter, at least. So.
Yeah, well, the thing is, like, people have a really big hate boner against Destiny, so anyone who's, like, not immediately jumping on, like, Destiny for everything that he says is, like, considered some sort of a simp or something.
Right.
But, yeah, I mean, I have my disagreements with Destiny all the time.
It could be worse for you. I'm a fucking Doug Walker fan, so I have to fucking hear a lot of shit talked. I'm just like, man, leave him alone, guys. He's had enough. Anyway. Yeah. Let's get into veganism, I guess. So why the fuck should I stop eating meat?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, right, like I'm not like a moral objectivist or something. There are certain people who I'm just like never going to be able to. So you think
that just to I'm sorry to interrupt or anything. But just to clarify, you're not you believe you're a nihilist, right? Or would you describe yourself as that? I mean, like, if I just define nihilist as like someone who doesn't believe objectively that there is some objective meaning or moral nature to the universe.
Yeah, by that definition, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't believe there's some like objective morality or anything like this or meaning. I guess the argument for veganism then is I kind of just take like values that I think most people already hold but don't consistently apply, and just try to show that most people would be more comfortable with veganism or having vegan ethics if they like knew what their position would lead to, like if consistently applied. So like the typical way that I'll show this is I can just ask like, so if you think that it's okay to, you know, kill animals and eat them and stuff, but it's not okay to do the same to humans, what trait is true of animals, which if true of humans would suddenly make it okay? And then when we start to try and give answers to that sort of question, then we get into really weird territory, because for almost any answer you can give, I can give a human with that trait, right? So if you say like it's okay to kill animals because they're not as intelligent or something, I can, you know, say, okay, well, on your view, then it would seem fine to, you know, murder and eat a severely mentally disabled person or something like this. So yeah, I guess like that's sort of my argument. It seems very hard to draw a line in terms of like where we who we grant moral consideration that encompasses like all the humans that we want to encompass without like encompassing animals. So yeah, I guess that would be like my basic spiel.
So I guess that the the thing I would bring up at that point is basically that we don't necessarily kill and eat people, but in a lot of ways we kind of do that. Like in a broader sense, you know what I mean? Like we don't necessarily eat a person, but we'll use them up in a fucking factory or something. You know, or a sweatshop in the third world, and it's like, I eat the chocolate. I know it's fucking picked by slaves that are fucking being held against their will in you know, terrible conditions. Diamond mines. I've bought diamond jewelry for, you know, spouses, you know, past flings and shit like that. You know, all these things, like Amazon. I buy all kinds of shit on Amazon. I know Jeff Bezos is a piece of fucking shit. I know that the workers are treated horribly and abysmally, but I'm still ordering my Amazon shit. And I guess that, you know, I could be really intellectually lazy and just fall back on the old no ethical consumption under capitalism. But, like, you know, really what it is just like, at what point does it just become too much for a person to even deal with? Because so much of the goods and services that we enjoy here as a matter of convenience in America are built on hideous, grotesque exploitation and you know, abysmal moral things, like, you know, and you know, like your shirt, you know, you probably have things in that very room that are in some way tethered to exploitation of human beings, sometimes rather brutally. So, you know, that being the case, if, you know, shouldn't that be priority? If you're even going to just like, I'm going to become more ethical in one way or another, like, shouldn't the human stuff be prioritized over the animal stuff? Like, I'm going to cut out one thing because that's what I feel like I can really do to make some kind of difference. Like, wouldn't it be better to cut out the sweatshop sourced food, you know, clothes rather than the meat source food or something like that? Like, how do you make the prioritization of, like, of all the unethical shit that I enjoy on a day-to-day basis, meat's the thing?
Right. Yeah. So, I guess so. I've thought about this quite a bit. I think so. I think the main thing that we need to, I guess, like separate out is we can very easily say, if we want to, I don't know, like to what extent I would agree with this claim or not. We get into like some really weird territory because like I value humans more than I value animals typically, but at the same time, like you have to take into account like the severity of what's happening and so on, and how many beings are being subjected to this. But even like, I guess, sort of leaving that line of thought, I could even grant that like the fact or the sort of conditions of things like sweatshops and, you know, the sort of capitalist wage labor and so on, the fact that these conditions exist are worse than the fact that, you know, factory farming conditions exist. However, it's not enough to just say that, to just talk about which of these conditions are worse. We actually have to ask the question of how much harm are we contributing, I guess, with our consumption. So, like, for example, and this is going to sound like some sort of a weird, like, libertarian pro-child labor argument for a second, but just bear with me.
I'll let you follow the thread down and not shut it off at that pass, I guess.
Yeah. So for example, like if I am buying stuff that's made in like a sweatshop, right? Okay. So let's say like I'm buying meat, right? I think it's pretty easy to like make the argument that, well, it depends on what moral system we're using, but if we care about like utility or like the well-being of like conscious creatures or something like this, then it's very easy for me to make an argument that me not consuming meat increases utility or at least decreases harm, because if I am not eating meat, then less meat is being produced, less animals are being needlessly killed, etc. Now, the question then is like, can we make a similar argument for against buying from sweatshops? So obviously, sweatshop conditions are horrible, and we should craft policy to try and combat those conditions. But is our action, like, if we were to stop consuming from sweatshops, would we actually be increasing utility? And my argument, at least that would sort of aim to demonstrate why we should be skeptical of that claim, is look, assuming it's not like literally forced slave labor, and it's just like a sweatshop where people have to work in these conditions and these conditions are horrible. These people are still voluntarily choosing to work in those conditions, which I guess suggests that as horrible as those conditions are, their other options were even worse, right? So if we stopped buying from sweatshops, then these people, as opposed to having really horrible, shitty jobs, would just have like no jobs and would be like even poorer, which presumably would be worse for them, which is why they're sweatshop workers in the first place. So although like sweatshops are a horrible thing that we should combat via policy, I don't know if you can really make an argument that, or at least I think we have reason to be skeptical of an argument that buying from sweatshops directly contributes harm in the same way that like buying meat does, I guess.
So you say you generally value humans more than animals. I actually don't. So I don't even know why. It seems like we should be on the other ends of this fucking shit, but whatever. So you say it's not enough to ask which is worse between factory farming and sweatshops. Well, so you have a thing where you say when it comes to the sweatshops, we need policy-driven solutions to the sweatshop thing. But when it comes to the factory farming stuff, it's like, well, we need to take personal accountability for this, and like we need to personally take like. So it's almost like you have two different approaches for things that are, to me, very similar issues. Like the things that you're able to delineate as different between the two things. You said that, you know, while the animals are literal, you know, chattel property kind of thing going on, the people working in a sweatshop are not literal slaves. They, you know, although in some instances like chocolates and diamonds and stuff, they are literal slaves a lot of time. But, you know, for like a sweatshop, you're right. It's not like they're not forced at gunpoint to go in there and do that shit. But you know, they're strongly coerced by circumstance. I think we can agree on that. So I guess my question is that what is, you know, neither of those differences seem to account for the difference in approach between these two things. So why is it, what in your mind is the difference that exists between a factory farm and a sweatshop that makes you feel like one needs to be dealt with policy and in broader political terms, and one needs to be dealt with on an individual decision sort of basis?
Yeah, so to be clear, I think that the conditions of factory farming and the, you know, consumption of meat and so on, I do support addressing that on a sort of policy basis.
Really quickly, what kind of policy would you advocate for there?
Well, certainly to start out with something like much stricter regulations in terms of how we're allowed to treat animals in factory farms and under what conditions we can, like, you know, breed them and so on. Um, I think that kind of thing would be like a good start. I think we're very far away from just like banning meat or something. Maybe once we have like good lab meat and shit, we'll be able to do that. But it's like nowhere near what anything we're able to do right now. But so I guess I do support addressing the animal agriculture industry through policy and through personal consumption. The reason why I would say that we should focus in terms of sweatshops, we should just focus on that in terms of policy rather than through consumption, is that in the case of animal agriculture, if we don't consume meat, we are like directly preventing harm. We are preventing animals from being killed. If we stopped buying from a sweatshop and that sweatshop went out of existence, I don't think you could really make an argument that that's contributing harm, because although the current conditions of the sweatshop workers are harmful, if we stopped buying from those sweatshops and then the sweatshops went out of business, then the sweatshop workers just all of a sudden don't have a job or have an even worse job. So both conditions are bad. Both conditions should be addressed through policy. But in the case of animal agriculture, I think there's a good argument that actually not consuming it is beneficial to the beings who are being harmed by the industry. Whereas in sweatshops, I feel like by not consuming, we wouldn't be helping the people in that industry. If anything, we would be worsening their conditions. And that's why, like, the coercion by circumstance thing is true. And I certainly wasn't trying to imply that it's like totally voluntary. But what it means, these people certainly are coerced by their circumstances. But what that entails is that if they weren't doing the thing that they're doing right now, if they weren't in the sweatshop, the other sort of circumstances that they're being coerced by were bad enough to the point where they thought this was a better alternative as opposed to just, starving or whatever. So yeah, I guess that would be my argument for like what the morally relevant difference is.
Okay, so as far as your stance that you want stricter regulation for the treatment of animals in more humane conditions in factory farms, I 100% would support that immediately right out of the gate right now. Out of the, I was hoping so that I could really just like be like boom, that you'd be like, I think we should just ban meat tomorrow, but I guess you're not stupid enough to fucking fall for that. So whatever. Eventual transition to clone meats, 100% on board with that. So here's the thing. As far as your argument, let me see if I can summarize this correctly. You tell me if this is right. The difference between a factory farm and a sweatshop in terms of ethical stuff in your mind is that if we stop, using the sweatshop, it doesn't necessarily improve material conditions for those people. They're still going to be impoverished and living in a miserable sort of place. But if we stop the consumption of meat, that could reduce harm because, less animals will be killed, or at least the cycle of animal killing will not be as perpetuated because, obviously any animal that's in a factory farm now, they're not going to spare it. But eventually the cycle of killing will end at least. Is that fairly accurate, or am I missing some nuance there?
Yeah, basically. I guess just like my sort of like broad overview of it would just be that when we're deciding whether or not to consume something, the decision should be based on, does this consumption cause harm? And certainly workers in sweatshops are being harmed by that condition, just as animals in the animal agriculture industry. However, if we stop purchasing from the animal agriculture industry, that actually betters the condition of the beings being harmed by that industry. Whereas I don't think you could say the same thing for sweatshops, because in the absence of that harmful sweatshop job, they'd just be starving or in a worse sweatshop or something like this.
Right. Okay. So I guess that the question then becomes like, so I agree that if everybody or a significant portion of people tomorrow are like, no more meat for us, like if it was like 20% of the population or something, or 30, some significant percentage, suddenly decided that's enough, this is immoral, we will no longer engage in this, then you would see a reduction in harm. But, at the numbers that people have actually been converted to veganism and vegetarianism that we've seen so far, with people making the same arguments you're making right here and right now, we have not seen a significant reduction in the amount of people that eat meat. So I'll even tell you, this is anecdotal, so you could take that as you may, but like I've heard several variations of this exact story where people say to me, hey, I visited one of these factory farms, or I went to saw where chickens were killed or cows were killed. And it was, oh my God, it was so eye-opening. It was so disgusting. I stopped eating meat for a few months. You know what I mean? And so even like direct exposure and like moral and just visceral revulsion, like, oh God, no, that's horrible. That's disgusting. Even those people kind of come back around to it, even though I think in their heart of hearts continue to think it's unethical. But they still consume the meat because chicken tastes good, and the hamburger is good, and the pork chop is good, and all that stuff. And look, I'm one of my hobbies in life is I like to cook things. So I understand a little bit about the culinary arts. I'm a novice, but I try to do that kind of stuff. And I could tell you that there's no maybe for ground beef we're starting to get a substitute, but for most of the things that meat can do, there is not a viable steak substitute. There is not a viable pork chop substitute. There is not a viable really chicken substitute in most instances. Maybe for like a chicken nugget or something, but not for like a chicken breast. And I think that people are kind of raised on this stuff. I mean, obviously, if a culture is vegetarian, then it's not that hard for it to stay vegetarian. But if a culture is like so entrenched in this meat-eating way, it seems like these arguments have been put forth and they haven't really made they haven't really practically affected the opinions of the I think like veganism has been stalled at like 2% of the population or something, like vegan and vegetarian, 2% of the population for like since the 70s. So it doesn't really seem like advocacy for this position has actually delivered on the harm reduction that it promises. What would you say to that?
Yeah, so I guess I would say a couple things to that. So for one, there's sort of, I guess, like the main thrust is this idea of causal like impotence, and the idea is, if we can't get a larger number of the population to go vegan, then there's really no point in, I guess, doing it, because you're not really mitigating a substantial amount of harm. There's actually, like, I don't want to get too much into like the I guess like the empirical aspects of it or whatever, because obviously I wouldn't expect you to like, I guess, like read and like debunk a study,
yeah, I'm not going to do that on the fly,
right?
So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but just in case you're curious, and you want to read like later, there's a paper that I can send you, and basically the idea is, with regards to the causal impotence thing, even just like one person going vegan, even if you just decided to go vegan. So usually when you purchase meat, that's not actually contributing a significant amount of harm, because you're just one consumer out of many different consumers. But there are certain purchases that are in the industry called threshold purchases, where the producer of meat will say something like, okay, well, if this many, and it's just an arbitrary number, if this many animals or this many meat products are bought, let's say like turkeys or something, if this many turkeys are bought in one day, then tomorrow I'm going to order extra turkeys, right? And so every time you purchase meat, there is a certain probability that your purchase of meat is going to be the threshold purchase, which directly causes more animals to be bred and killed than otherwise would have been bred and killed, right? So, and I think the number comes out of, just for chicken alone, the number comes out at like, there is a 90% chance that, given the average amount of chicken that a person consumes over the course of their life, there's something like an over a 90% chance that over your life, you will cause at least like 900 chickens to be bred and killed, who otherwise, if you hadn't been purchasing meat, wouldn't have been bred and killed. So even if it didn't,
because they're like looking at you in the long term, like, oh, this is a meat. We got another meat eater here, so they're gonna need about this many chickens over the course of their life. So keep the numbers up to there, right?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
Sure.
like. Yeah, so like if you just purchase meat throughout your life, there's a good chance that like your purchase of meat at certain points in your life is going to be like the threshold.
So I guess that
purchase.
this, like, it's at a certain point though, it kind of rings like the fucking third party argument, Like, you could sit there and tell people like, look, if you vote for this third party, it can win. It can do it. It can totally do it. Like, there's nothing actually stopping it from happening. If everyone just said, fuck this, we're going to vote for this third party, then okay, boom. We can have it. But it never happens, because people just kind of look around at each other. I mean, like the studies, like the whole like the smoke-filled room and shit, right? Where you put a person alone in a room, you fill it with smoke, and they're like, holy shit, I better get out of here. You put a bunch of people in a room and fill it with smoke, they all start looking at each other like, oh shit, what are we going to do as a collective? It's like they're dumber as a collective in certain respects, because they're looking for like, oh, what are other people doing? If everyone else is just sitting here, I guess I should just sit here. Because it's almost more important on that. So like if you have a country where like, I don't know what the percentage is of meat eaters, like 98%, something like that. Some crazy shit, right? Most people.
Yeah.
Vast majority.
Most people.
So it's like you have a country and the cheeseburgers on every billboard, the fucking baconators on every billboard. It's like you turn on the TV, it's the fucking pepperoni pizza, right? Like when every fucking societal norm is just like meat, it seems like to me the only fucking actual solution to this is going to be a policy-based solution, and that the individual isn't really going to make a fucking difference. 900 chickens is a drop in the bucket of the fucking, in the order of like how many fucking chickens are fucking killed every year, right? Like, what are we talking, like billions? Are we talking billions of chickens a year fucking killed for our consumption? Yeah. We're probably talking billions, right?
Billions, yeah.
Yeah, it's like easily. It's got to be billions because there's fucking...
globally, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, I would say just in this country alone, we got, what, like 300 million people here? Most of them eat fucking chicken at least a fucking couple times a week.
Yeah.
So, I mean...
Yeah, that's probably true.
I mean, fucking... So, yeah, I mean, it's got to be billions of chickens that are fucking getting murdered. So, like, 900 chickens drop in the fucking bucket in the ultimate fucking grand scheme of things, right? So, yeah. I don't know. Like, it feels to me like that, like... The only solution that actually is going to fucking put an end to the factory farming and the brutal cycle of suffering that I acknowledge exists is going to be a policy-driven solution, and it's probably going to have to involve some sort of actual alternative to meat. I don't think you're going to be able to do it. I don't think you're going to be able to change the culture. And some people will say that's a lazy argument because you could make it about any number of things. But, like, honestly, like, I saw someone in the chat. I know it's not your argument. I'm supposed to be debating you, not the chat. But someone was like, well, you could make that argument about racism. Well, a lot of people are racist, so it's okay. It's okay if I'm racist. I mean, I think that there's a fucking stronger impetus to solve racism than there is fucking factory farming. Sorry. But anyway, I don't mean to fucking get sidetracked by what the dumbass chat is saying. What do you have to say for what I just put forth?
Yeah, so I guess the relevant question here is going to be like how much suffering would a change in our individual consumptive habits have to affect, right? Or I guess how much change would our individual consumptive patterns changing have to occur in order for us to say that I guess it's worth going vegan, right? Because it's true that I guess if over the course of my life my consumption of meat only causes like a few thousand animals to be bred and slaughtered. That is only a drop in the bucket compared to the overall amount of animals that are being killed in the country. But I would still say that that's like significant enough for me, right? Like if even if me changing my consumption doesn't lead to this broader cultural impact that addresses the totality or even the majority of the problem, if me individually going vegan can prevent, thousands of sentient beings from experiencing unnecessary suffering, I would consider that to be like more than significant enough to drive me, I guess, to say that being vegan is the most moral way that I guess we can consume food. And so I guess like,
but at that point, we're talking about a personal decision more than anything. So I guess that it just comes down to me. It's like, well, I get the personal logic for justifying your own veganism, and I guess the urge to proselytize to others, but like, it sounds to me like you have no more faith than I do that this is an actual solution to the problem, right? Or do you think that yes or no, do you believe that individual action can put an end to the meat industry in America?
Oh, no, I mean, me going vegan isn't going to put an end to the meat industry, right? But like, I guess what it does do is it limits the amount of sentient beings who are massively negatively affected by the meat industry, which I consider to be like a moral good, right?
Right.
And I guess like what I would say is like, if we're just going to say like, okay, well maybe, if I went vegan, it would cause thousands of sentient creatures not to suffer and be slaughtered, but that's not like significant enough to make me think that it's moral or morally like correct to go vegan.
So I guess what do we like? So when it comes to like sentience, right? Like, so the average like mentally disabled person, I think, is still smarter than a chicken, right? I mean, like, I don't know, a chicken's a pretty dumb fucking animal.
The average one, yeah,
right.
Like, of course, right? But I can always find like extremely severely, like, have you ever seen that video on YouTube? It's called like Raising Brie or something.
No. I remember the Terry Schiavo case. I was like all for pulling the plug on that one. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't eat her afterwards, but
I think it's okay to like pull the plug if like there's somebody who's like not sentient or something like this. Or
right. Well, so what is sentience in this this thing? Because we're putting forth that a lot, so maybe that should be like defined, explored, whatever. Like, what is your working definition of sentience as a term?
Yeah, I guess sentience is just like the experience of being like something, I guess. It's like having conscious experience.
I mean, how do we know that chickens have that though? Because like they can't report it to us, right? So like we can't ask a chicken like, are you sentient? Do you have an experience of self? Do you have a notion of you? You know?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, I guess like whether or not they have like a notion of them, that could be a bit more like that could be like a bit more, I guess, contestable, like whether they have like some, I guess, more abstract understanding of like self-identity or something like this. But it certainly seems to be the case that chickens have the capacity to experience like pleasure, have the capacity to experience like pain, and can experience like emotional attachment to their families and to their friend animals or whatever. So like one of the sadder like stories you'll hear about like the dairy industry is that when after they forcefully inseminate the mother cow, and then she gives birth so that she can produce milk, obviously. What they usually do is they'll take the baby cow that she produces and they'll like drag it away to kill it for veal.
Right.
And sometimes they don't, but usually it's taken away for some reason or another. And because cows have such a high degree of like emotional maturity, or I think that's like the term, emotional maturity. Cows actually grow like pretty extremely harsh connections to their children, such that you'll hear stories about like after the baby is dragged away, the mother cow can be recorded or can be reported to be like crying like every day for like months because it was separated from its child, right? So it certainly seems that like animals display some degree of like consciousness,
well, I mean,
emotion.
a cow for
pain.
sure. Like a pig obviously is a pretty intelligent animal and stuff like that. So I'm not saying every animal we don't eat, but like focusing specifically on the chicken though. You know what I mean? Like I don't know, like some of the criteria that you laid out for like chicken could be met by like grass. Like grass in a sense can feel pain and stuff like that. But obviously, it doesn't have emotional connection to other blades of grass, or even in a rudimentary sense, at least not that I know of. If anyone wants to correct me on that, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure that plants have sort of like evolutionarily derived like responses to things, right?
Sure.
Like if a blade of grass is like cut, it'll like, I don't know, release some sort of a toxin or something like this.
Right.
Just because evolution has programmed it to like, I guess, survive. But I guess I think that it's pretty widely said that like though plants have some like response to their environment, they don't actually like consciously experience, or we don't have like any evidence.
I would never make the argument that grass is conscious, but
right.
But I mean, like if you look at I remember watching a David Attenborough special on the plants. I think it was, I don't know if it was a Life of Plants or something along those lines, but yeah, plants actually have more complex behaviors than you might imagine. But yeah, obviously they don't have brains, they don't have central nervous systems or anything like that. But I do think they have. I think that because they are living things, they do have rudimentary forms of some of those things. But I'm not making the argument like, well, if you respect life, you don't eat grass or whatever. I don't eat grass anyway, but like don't eat broccoli or whatever. I'm not making that argument. I feel like there is like a line of like sentience is a gradient, right? So obviously, a pig is probably more sentient than a chicken. It's got a bigger brain. It's probably got better problem-solving skills and stuff like that. A chicken is definitely more sentient than a house plant. House plant is probably more sentient than most Republicans, I guess. Anyway, yeah. So I guess that when it comes to the sentient, I mean, I'm not really going to make the sentience argument because, like I opened with, there is kind of a thing in this country where we're pretty comfortable with exploiting like human beings that we know are sentient for a lot of goods and services. I guess that it kind of just boils down to you're making a moral choice that to me is like a personal choice. There's other moral choices that could be made concerning all sorts of different products. Like, you know, I could very easily, you know, cut chocolate out of my diet and there'd be less of a demand in the grand scheme of things, I guess, for the little slave kids that pick the cocoa beans, you know, because it's I could, you know, stop I could stop buying the sweatshop shirt. Now, I guess the conditions in that country aren't going to get any better, but maybe some of those jobs get moved back to the United States or something, and someone gets a better, higher paying job in a you know, more developed country at least. So maybe it does a little bit better for that person, if not for the person in the other country. But
right, well, that would be the trade-off. Is that
sure, of course.
You know, I could say that like with the animal agriculture industry,
well, I'm just saying
like
it seems like ethics is not usually much of a factor when it comes to consumption under capitalism. And it seems kind of selective in a way that, I don't know, doesn't really make perfect sense to me. I mean, I guess I get it in and of itself in isolation. Hey, I eat less animals, thus creating less demand for animals to be killed for my consumption. It's a pretty sound argument, but I feel like there's so many other things you could apply it to that maybe it wouldn't be perfect one-to-one analogies, but are pretty fucking close. And you know, like we don't typically think that way. I don't know. Like I said, I order shit off Amazon all the time. Like I could very easily be like, well, I'll order from somewhere else because Amazon is a scourge upon the earth, and it totally is. And Jeff Bezos is a piece of shit, but I don't do that. And I don't, you know, a lot of people who probably feel the same way about Amazon still shop on Amazon because, once again, super fucking convenient. So I don't know. I guess that I'm not necessarily hearing the argument for why this issue specifically is the time to listen to ethics above all of the other areas of concern. I guess I want to ask too, along with that, you know, how you personally feel about meat as a food, like just in terms of like the culinary sense. Like obviously you used to eat meat, so were you a person that enjoyed meat, or were you a person that was kind of like, take it or leave it kind of thing?
Yeah, so I guess sort of address that in order. So I mean, with regards to you know, I guess comparisons between the animal agriculture industry and other things, so I guess the question is just going to be, again, like, does us contributing to, say, I don't know, sweatshops or something else, do we have as clean cut an argument to show that consuming from these sources like contributes like net harm to the world or to sentient creatures in the same way that consuming animals does, right? So for example, like the sweatshop example, like you're right, like maybe that job would go back to an American, but then again, the trade-off is like the person who did have that sweatshop labor job now, instead of having a bad sweatshop job, now has no job and is likely going to starve or something horrible like this, right? So at best, like the utility gained for the American is going to be outweighed by the massive amount of utility lost for the former sweatshop worker, right?
Right.
Similarly, like with Amazon, it'll be something like, do we really have like a clear-cut argument to say that if we all stopped purchasing from Amazon, the next company that all of those jobs would go to would
let's say we started,
like
you know, we started doing like, okay, let's all buy our shit from like Costco or something because they pay their workers better, you know?
Okay, so if we like stopped all buying from Amazon and started all buying from like Costco, that would probably be like morally preferable, I guess. But I guess like the thing is, like, would we say that like the utility that we I guess the utility that's like represented in the pay differentials between like Costco and Amazon, is that going to be equivalent to like the utility between like an animal like being horrifically like tortured throughout its life and then slaughtered and like just not having that experience? And I mean, I probably would say that we should also like if we can make very clear-cut arguments for if buying something directly causes a substantial amount of harm, and if we could, if I could get like or if people could make like a very clear argument to demonstrate that like buying from this company as opposed to this company would like generate some massive amount of like positive utility for the world, or to the amount of harm that or decrease the amount of harm to a substantial degree that accrues to sentient creatures, then I would say that yeah, that should also be um, the more ethical thing to do, right? Um, and I guess in terms of like meat, um, I I did enjoy meat. I ate a lot of like fast food, I guess, which was like that's where I got most of my meat. I ate like a lot of like Taco Bell and like McDonald's and shit. Really now the only place I can eat from is like Burger King because they have like the Impossible burger or whatever. But you know, I'm not eating Burger King every day, so um, yeah. So you know, I did like meat, but at the end of the day, I felt like the pleasure that I got from eating meat wasn't worth like the I guess the massive amount of like suffering that's experienced by the animals as a result of me eating meat because I like the taste of it.
So let me ask you this: if it was down to if the animals had a more pleasant life before being slaughtered, would that? Because I notice you just like bring up suffering a lot. So would that mitigate? I don't know. I doubt you would go and be like, I'll eat meat again because now this is the animal's pampered before it dies
Right.
or whatever. But I guess would you view that as I mean, you probably would view that as a more moral paradigm, right?
Yeah, it's better, you know, in the same way that like I would never support, you know, breeding humans to slaughter and eat humans under any circumstance, but certainly if that was something that was happening, I would rather those humans not be like, you know, horrifically tortured throughout their entire lives before being slaughtered for food. So yeah, it's definitely better. Yeah, I would say so.
I wonder how much meat go. I mean, I kind of wonder how much an individual choice to not eat meat actually affects things. Like, part of me feels like there probably already is a surplus of meat produced. Like, I mean, there's definitely more meat produced than is consumed, right? Like, I don't know how much meat waste there is, but I feel like probably up to a point, it's not really going to make much of a difference. I know you said you had a study that you were going to send me on that, though, so I guess I will look into the actual numbers in the study before I make any claims about that. But I'm dubious of the proposition, at least on a visceral level. But I'd have to actually look at the data, I guess. Let me just look up really quick what kind of like meat waste we have in this country, because I think that might shed some light. Meat waste, food loss, and waste facts. Yeah. Hold on. Don't mean to. Okay, cereals. Okay, so fish and seafood. What is this? Is the percentages here the loss percentages? The fuck this infographic is trying to tell me. Okay. I'm gonna look at one more source. If I can't figure it out, I'm just gonna give up on that. Yeah, I'm reading a lot about food waste in general. I'm having a little bit more trouble finding specifically like what level of meat is just like goes to waste. Okay, here we go. Meat and animal products, 11.9%. So there's already like an 11.9%, like they're producing 11.9% more than the market actually dictates, right? So that being the case, I don't know, it just makes me even more dubious of the idea that one person stopping really makes a difference. Now, obviously, a lot of people stopping makes a difference. You know, like if, you know, even if 1% or something like that stop, maybe that we would see less of that waste, or maybe the waste would just increase to, you know, 12.9%. I don't know how that would work.
Well, that's kind of like the point that I was going to make is like So, I mean, at the end of the day, what matters to people who produce meat isn't necessarily how much meat we actually consume or something like this, but it's just going to be dictated by like how much or like how much people buy rather or something like this, right? So I guess the idea that I was alluding to earlier is that, farmers and I guess meat producers have like these thresholds where they say something like, I think the number for chicken is like 900.
Mm-hmm.
They'll say like if 900 pieces of chicken are bought within one day, then next time we're going to order like more chickens, right?
Right.
And so, even if there is like some number of waste, there's
So
still always
basically, if
going
they
to be a
sell, like if they
chance.
sell 900 chickens one day, their algorithm will be like, oh, we need to order 1,000 chickens tomorrow,
Right.
or whatever.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah. So, I mean, like, there is certainly waste, but there's always, regardless, there's always going to be a chance that when you're purchasing meat,
That
there's a
you are
certain
the
percentage
threshold
chance that you're
person.
the threshold. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
So it seems very weird to me that they would base it on thresholds and not just like an overall like sense of the number. Like, if it would be like, oh, well, we sold, like, does it really make a difference between like, oh, we sold 899, so we're not going to order 1,000, but we sold 900. Oh, we better order 1,000 because that's the threshold.
Yeah.
Like
I think the number has to do
I'm
with
kind
how
of
many animals are in the inventory or something like
right.
this.
Gotcha. So there's like a lot of like probably some complicated math shit that I'll fucking never be able to wrap my mind around in 1,000 years. But
yeah.
Anyway, I don't know. I feel like we've explored this topic. Is there anything you'd like to like close with on that?
Yeah. So, I guess one thing that I would like to stress is that so I can totally understand where people are coming from, where they say like, okay, well, even like putting aside, like I'm not too versed on like the data of like whether or not veganism has been becoming like a broader like something that's like catching on, right? I mean, there are things like meat alternatives are starting to become more popular, but I don't know how indicative that actually is or anything like that. But I guess even like putting aside whether or not there's sort of a broader cultural vegan movement that's going to meaningfully challenge the totality of the problem of like the meat industry. Even if I can just say like, hey, you going vegan, it's not going to solve the problem. It's not going to solve most of the problem, but it is going to reduce the amount of sentient creatures who are experiencing pretty extreme degrees of suffering to a pretty significant extent. I mean, we're talking over the course of one's life, like thousands, like maybe even tens of thousands of like sentient creatures, sentient individuals, right? And if we replace those animals with like humans, right? If we said like, okay, well, if you stopped eating burgers, like tens of thousands of humans would not die and not be tortured as a result. Presumably most people would say that, yeah, okay, well, even if my consumption isn't going to destroy the meat industry, I should probably still reduce the amount of humans being tortured and slaughtered. And if that is your view, then you're going to have to sort of grapple with that question of, well, what trait is actually true of animals that, if true of humans, would change your mind to say that actually it is okay to continue eating meat and perpetuating their suffering. And then, of course, the next step is going to be if you say like intelligence or sentience or anything like this, then you're going to have to say, do you really think that it would be okay to perpetuate the mass slaughtering of people who are of lower intelligence or who are severely mentally disabled or something like this? So yeah, I guess that's just sort of like my final thought on that.
I don't know. I mean, you'd have to. I don't know how they taste. You'd have to have to fucking give me. One of the things I do, I guess, concerned about, kind of a maybe slightly veering to weird place, but like I feel like when you put this moral imperative on people, and when they inevitably come around and have that moment of weakness where they like chow down on some bacon, they're gonna feel like fucking murderers. You know what I mean? And I know vegetarians. I've been with them in their fucking candid moments where they talk about the time they fucking went a little nuts and bought a fucking cheeseburger or something, and felt really bad and shit. But
well, I guess. So what I would say in that
I don't know.
case,
I feel like there's like a psychological stress factor there too, but that's probably like a whole other fucking discussion or whatever. But you can. I'll let you say something to it. Obviously, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, like my answer to that would just be like, well, certainly, there's going to be vegans who have moments of weakness and eat meat or something like that, and then they feel guilty about it. But, you know, if we take someone who's like vegan but eats meat maybe like once every few years or something like this, and then feels guilty about it, well, there is a harm that's been accrued by whoever convinced them to go vegan because now there's this harm of the guilt that they feel. But I would say that ultimately there is, as a result of that person going, I guess, mostly vegan, there's still going to be hundreds less sentient creatures who are, tortured and slaughtered as a result of that person going mostly vegan. And I think that reduction in animal suffering, I guess, more than outweighs like the guilt related suffering felt by the mostly vegan individual in this case.
Right. Also, like when it comes to, I guess there is obviously variability in animal intelligence, but, obviously, there is no, like, across the board, a pig is like as intelligent as, like, I don't know what, a fucking 5-year-old or something. Something like that. But like pretty consistently, they're not, so I mean, if you can kind of draw a line at intelligence just because as a group, pigs are not going to be as intelligent as human beings, whereas human beings, like, I don't know, you could kind of like cumulatively do like a general like median or average IQ of the species and kind of approach it that way. And obviously we have a bias towards our own species, for fuck's sake.
That's
like
actually a good point. Yeah.
Whether they're retarded or whatever the fucking nomenclature is now. What is it? Mentally challenged, or I don't know. Retarded so much better. Anyway, I don't know. You want to talk about something else, or you feel like?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I have any other topics, but if you had something in mind, then yeah, I'd more than willing to talk about anything else. I will say, like, really quickly though, I do think that that is a good point that you touched on, because I've thought about that before. But then, the sort of hypotheticals that we'd have to say is like, okay, well, if humans have, or if it's okay to kill pigs because pigs on average have this low an IQ, then all we'd have to do is like postulate some sort of a world or some sort of like an idiocracy type event where like the vast majority of humans are mentally retarded, and presumably like even in that world, like we wouldn't say that we can go around genociding humans just because on average their IQ is below a certain level, right? We'd say that, well, these humans are severely retarded, but they also have like conscious experience, they feel pleasure and pain, so like we probably just shouldn't like needlessly torture and kill and exploit them and so on.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you got to prune the tree. I don't know. No, I mean, you're right, of course, about that. I don't know. I think there is kind of an element of like speciesism, though, right? Like we have a certain inborn, innate sort of instinct to preserve human life that we don't necessarily feel for other living things. I mean, obviously, like most people, if they see a stray cat or dog run out into the road are going to make an effort to not hit it, or even a squirrel or something like that. They're going to be like, oh, I don't want to run over this animal. I have some, there's some, instinct to preserve life, I think, in general. But obviously there's a stronger inclination towards, your own species, which, for good or for ill is just kind of built in, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I will touch on this. I actually, like, in something like 10 minutes or something, I'll have to head out. But I will say, like, on this issue, so yeah, we certainly do have a sort of preference for humans, right? But I guess, like, okay, so if we're going to say that it's okay to, or if someone were to make the claim that it's like morally okay to,
well, look, if you only got 10 minutes, let's just cut down to the fucking real, like, nihilistic chase. There's no objective morality. Everything is just kind of boils down to a matter of opinion.
Yeah,
the value of
like
the value of
feeling, yeah.
The value of human life and animal life is equally just like a subjective fucking variable in the equation. So
yeah, Yeah, but I would say like even if, right, like even if we do have a preference for our own
Right.
species, right? I mean, to say that it would be okay to like kill animals because they're not part of that species,
Right.
I guess that would lead us to things like if we were to take like a human like consciousness and put it in like a non-human body or like
Right.
an
Yeah.
AI or something like that, like presumably we would still say like the conscious experience is still enough that even though they're not part of like our species, we probably still wouldn't want to like kill them or something.
Right. Sure. But I mean, like, it's just a matter of want at that point. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean it's
Like,
subjective. Yeah, of
yeah. I
course.
mean, like, so, like, I have a thing. Like, obviously, I think most people are kind of in my boat where they kind of. Yeah, I don't really like factory farming. I don't really like the fact that animals are suffering. I don't really like to think about, a pig getting killed or a cow getting killed or whatever the fuck. But at the end of the day, they're still gonna fucking chow down on the cheeseburger. They're still gonna fucking dine on the swine. You know what I mean? Because it's like they're able to just kind of like, yeah, well, I don't like it, but that's the world we live in, I guess. And this burger is pretty tasty.
Mhm.
And I feel like that's why I feel like everyone's really a fucking nihilist at the core of their fucking being, even the people that deny it. But
Mhm.
that's once again probably a different argument. But like, what do you think of that? What do you think of that mentality? Obviously, it's negative, and that's kind of why when I look at problems like this and I think about it, like if we all collectively want to solve something like this, we really have to we have to give it to the Leviathan to some extent, don't we? Like it has to be sort of like there has to be some kind of higher authority that's like, you guys, we've all kind of agreed this is fucked up. Let's not, like, as a group, let's not do this. And people who do are going to be like somehow, penalized or ostracized or something.
Mhm.
Because it's like you leave people their own devices. I feel like they're kind of come to this place where it's like, well, I don't like it, but that ham sure do taste good. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah. So certainly, I mean, it is a big problem. I think that there are a lot of people with sort of, I guess, like cognitive dissonance, where they can kind of like acknowledge that, what we do to animals probably isn't like morally justified for like the purposes of our taste buds or whatever.
Sure.
However, they just sort of think about it as like, well, I realize that this is probably immoral, but I really like, meat or something like that.
Right.
Um, and I guess like if I've really like if I can sort of come to terms with somebody or at least like convince somebody or maybe they just agreed previously, right? Or if I can like get somebody to acknowledge that like yeah, it is like morally the preferable thing to not consume meat and it's just a matter of cognitive dissonance, then I guess there's not really an argument that I can make to like get them to stop having cognitive dissonance. Because like the only thing that I can really argue is that it is morally preferable to not eat meat. And if I get someone to agree with that, but their actions just don't follow, I'm not a therapist, so I can't really like
Sure.
drive them to take that action.
Yeah, absolutely.
What I would suggest for somebody who's like on that threshold, though, is one thing that really helped to me is like after I'd sort of bought the philosophical arguments against meat. One of the things that really helped me sort of bridge my philosophical understanding and my emotional like motivation was I guess just like watching certain like documentaries and stuff that like show footage of like what actually happens to like the animals in the animal agriculture industry. And I guess when you can sort of like see it like happen and you can like see the fear and the pain and the torture in the animals' eyes and all of this shit, it really sort of like makes it more real, such that like the next time you eat meat you're like fuck, well if I purchase this meat, that thing that I saw happen is going to happen to like conscious creatures. And that sort of is what provided me the emotional motivation to actually like go vegan, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like one day this argument will be obsolete as we make the transition to cloned meats, genetically engineered super meats that haven't that well we've solved the problem of sentience, or we've figured out some way to reconstitute matter to be indistinguishable from the finest Kobe beef. But we're not there yet, so obviously until then, this discussion will happen over and over again. Thank you for coming on. Appreciate it. If I think of anything else that I want to argue with you about, you're always welcome back.
Okay, yeah, thanks for having me. Always willing to talk again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Mhm.